The flashing lights from 2 patrol cars washed across my driveway as I stepped out onto the porch. It was nearly dusk, the air still and heavy, the kind of quiet that usually settles over Maple Ridge Estates after dinner. But tonight, that quiet was broken by radios crackling and tires grinding over gravel. Through the gate, I could see my 16-year-old daughter standing on the walkway, her overnight bag slung over one shoulder. 2 officers were speaking to her, one hand resting near a holster, the other holding a small notepad. My heart sank before I even knew what had happened, because I already had a good guess. And I was right. At the edge of my property, wearing a pale blue blazer and that self-important posture she never seemed to drop, stood Patricia Hawthorne, the HOA president. Arms crossed, chin raised, she looked less like a neighbor and more like a security guard waiting for praise. She had called the police on my daughter. I didn't rush forward or raise my voice. I've spent enough years in courtrooms to know that calm can command more power than anger. I stepped down the porch steps, keeping my tone measured. "Officers, is there a problem here?" Both turned toward me surprised. One of them, tall, early 30s, cleared his throat. "Sir, we got a report of a possible burglary in progress." He pointed vaguely toward the house. "Caller said they saw someone unfamiliar entering the property from the side gate." "That's my daughter," I said. "She lives here on weekends." Patricia let out a sharp little laugh. "Your daughter?" "I find that hard to believe. I've never seen her here once." The officer glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, can you confirm if you saw any forced entry?" "No, but she was sneaking around," Patricia insisted. "Carrying a bag, looking suspicious, walking behind the fence line. You can't be too careful these days." I pulled my wallet from my jacket and handed the officer my identification. "Judge Malcolm Bryant," I said evenly. "This is my property. This young woman is family." The officer's eyes widened. Recognition flashed in his face. The second officer nodded quickly, murmuring something about misunderstanding. I turned to Patricia. "You called the police because you saw someone walking up a path?" "I called because she was acting suspicious," Patricia said, her voice defensive now. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," I said. "They wouldn't have. They might have asked first." For a moment, no one spoke. The officers apologized, offered a brief explanation about following protocol, and left after confirming everything was fine. The lights faded down the street, leaving us standing in silence under the porch light. Patricia lingered like she wanted to reclaim authority. "I was only doing my duty as HOA president," she said finally. "We have to protect the neighborhood." "Protect it from what?" I asked quietly. "Teenagers visiting their parents?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Inside, my daughter sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. "Dad," she whispered, "I didn't even do anything." "I know," I said, pouring her a glass of water. "Sometimes people make judgments before they ask questions." She nodded, though I could see the tremor in her fingers. That was the part that bothered me most, the way fear can slip into a young person's life so easily, handed to them by someone else's suspicion. The next morning, I wrote a letter to the HOA board. It wasn't angry or emotional. I outlined the incident exactly as it happened. The false report, the disruption, the humiliation. I asked for a review of Ms. Hawthorne's conduct and for clarification of what authority the HOA president actually had to police residents. I knew the letter would circulate. In communities like ours, news travels faster than any official notice. Within a week, whispers spread. People started sharing their own stories. One neighbor said Patricia had reported her cousin for loitering when he was simply unloading groceries. Another described how a landscaping crew quit after being followed and photographed by Patricia while mowing lawns. The pattern was clear. What had happened to us wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a symptom of power left unchecked. The HOA scheduled a community meeting 2 weeks later. I didn't plan to speak, but by the time I walked into the clubhouse, it was standing room only. Patricia sat at the head table, gavel in hand, trying to look composed. Her voice trembled slightly as she opened the meeting. "We've had some unfortunate misunderstandings lately," she said. "But my only goal has always been safety." A man in the back stood up. "Safety?" he said loudly. "You called the police on a kid." Murmurs rippled across the room. Another resident added, You called on my nephew last summer for parking in my driveway. Patricia's lips tightened. This isn't productive, she said. I've served this community faithfully for 5 years. I raised my hand. Then maybe it's time we talk about what service really looks like. The room quieted. When leadership becomes surveillance, when caution becomes suspicion, we stop being neighbors, I said. I understand wanting to protect what we've built here. But safety isn't created by fear. It's created by trust. Several people nodded. Patricia tried to interrupt, but the board chair, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. Ms. Hawthorne, he said, we'll review your conduct formally. For now, I think it's best you step back from your duties. The vote was quick and nearly unanimous. Patricia didn't wait to hear the final count. She stood, face pale, and left the clubhouse without another word. The weeks that followed were quiet. A temporary board took over daily operations. The fines, notes, and constant patrols stopped. The neighborhood seemed to exhale. People who used to avoid each other at the mailbox started chatting again. The kids played basketball in driveways. Someone organized a weekend cleanup of the park. It was as if the entire place had been holding its breath and finally remembered how to breathe. One evening, about a month later, I saw Patricia standing at the corner near the entrance sign. She was staring at the flowers around the Maple Ridge Monument, flowers she had once measured by the inch. For a moment, I considered walking over, but she looked so small standing there that I decided against it. Some lessons don't need lectures. They need silence. At home, my daughter was finishing homework at the kitchen counter. She looked up and asked, "Did anything happen to her?" "The board asked her to resign permanently," I said. "She won't be running things anymore." "Good," Maya replied. Then, after a pause, "Do you think she understands what she did?" I thought about that. I think she understands that power without perspective causes harm. Whether that changes her, that's something only time decides. A few weeks later, the HOA held elections. I didn't run for anything, but they asked me to help moderate the discussion. This time, the room felt different. People listened. Residents who had once been silent about petty fines and unnecessary letters now spoke about cooperation, transparency, and fairness. We rewrote several bylaws, adding clear limits on the president's authority and new clauses about respectful communication. They were small changes on paper, but big ones in spirit. Afterward, as people gathered for coffee and snacks, one of the officers who had responded that night stopped by to shake my hand. "Judge Bryant," he said, "I wanted to thank you. Most people would have yelled at us that night. You stayed calm. It made a difference." I told him I appreciated that. Truthfully, anger had been right there, pressing behind my ribs. But I knew losing control would only confirm someone else's assumptions. That's the weight of dealing with unfair suspicion. You end up managing not just the moment, but the message. A few months later, Patricia's house went up for sale. She moved quietly without farewells or announcements. A young couple bought the place, a teacher and a nurse, both eager to be part of the community. They planted wildflowers where Patricia's rigid hedges had been. For the first time, the entrance to Maple Ridge looked like it belonged to everyone. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, the HOA hosted a summer picnic at the park. There were games for the kids, a barbecue grill smoking under the trees, and music from a small local band. I watched my daughter laugh with friends near the swings, sunlight flickering through the leaves. For a moment, the memory of that night flashed back, the fear, the flashing lights, but it faded as quickly as it came. Because this was the ending we were meant to reach, a neighborhood learning from its mistakes. Later, one of my neighbors raised a toast. "To Judge Bryant," he said, "for reminding us that leadership means listening." I didn't want a spotlight, but I stood anyway. "Thank you," I said. "But the credit belongs to everyone who decided we could do better." Communities aren't built by titles. They're built by trust. Let's keep earning it. The crowd clapped softly. It wasn't the loud applause you hear at celebrations. It was warmer, quieter, real. As the evening wound down, I sat on a bench watching the last of the daylight fade. The park lights flickered on, and laughter echoed faintly from the picnic tables. My daughter came over and leaned against my shoulder. "You know, Dad," she said, "it's kind of nice here now." "Yeah," I said. "It finally feels like home." She smiled. "Guess sometimes good things come out of bad ones." Sometimes, I said. If people are willing to see what went wrong and fix it. She nodded, thoughtful. Do you think everyone learns that eventually? I looked out at the park, the neighbors talking, kids running through grass, the sound of easy conversation filling the air. Maybe not everyone, I said, but enough to make a difference. When we walked back to the house, the street was lined with porch lights glowing soft and steady. No patrols, no shouting, no tension, just quiet. And I realized that real justice doesn't always happen in a courtroom. Sometimes it happens in driveways, in meetings, in simple apologies and changed behavior. Sometimes it's just a neighborhood remembering what it means to be a community again. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.